Okay, so I'm going to show you how to call REST APIs from within your Android app. And before we get into the code, let's go over an example use case that we're going to be using in this tutorial. So in our use case, we want to call a REST API that's going to give us a list of all the countries in the world. And then we want to randomly select one of those countries and print out its name. So to do that, we're going to be using this API right here. It's this HTTPS URL. We're going to use this all resource, and that's pretty much all we need to do. There's no special authorization. We're not going to do anything with tokens or user auth or anything like that. Also, if you don't recognize it, this is the Postman application, which is great for testing out your APIs. So I'm just going to make a call like this so I can see what my response is going to look like, and then I get back this big response. So like I said, it's going to have a ton of information about the countries. It's going to have languages, capitals, time zones, a whole bunch of stuff. We only care about names though. So I'm going to copy this response. So yeah, in the code, the first thing we're going to do is call that API, get back that big response. Then we want to parse it to then randomly choose one and pronounce name. So to do that, we're going to be using JSON path. And JSON path just makes it very simple and straightforward with how to parse our response, which in this case is like 40,000 lines. So in the code, what we're going to do is say, give me a random number. Let's say it's 7. Give me the 7th result, and then, did I not? Okay, give me the 7th result, and then print out its name. So their JSON path is going to be very straightforward. It's going to look like this. But you could do more complicated stuff, like give me all entries that start with a certain letter, or that you could do whatever you want there. But in our case, we just want to choose a random one. So we'll choose a random number like 7 and then pronounce name. In this case, it was Anguilla. I don't think it's a real country, which is a better one. I think this has more than just countries. It has some like territories. Okay, cool. Argentina. So that's all we're going to be doing in our code. And so to go over what that actually looks like in our code, let's step into Android Studio. Okay, so I left some stubs here in these classes so I don't have to do it all from scratch, and because a lot of it's not relevant to the actual invoking of or calling of APIs in our code. But if you look at our main function, we can go over what our own API is going to look like. So we're going to instantiate our current class, this randomizer, and then we're just going to say randomizer, get us a random country name, and that's going to do all the work for us to randomly select the country and pronounce name. So the first method we need to make to get this all working is our get full country response method. So what this is going to do is what we went over in Postman, where it just calls the API and gets back that massive 40,000 line response. So how is this going to work? First thing we need to do is say what the URL is that we're going to be calling. So it's going to be a string. We'll just call it HTTPS URL. And we'll set that equal to, I have it written somewhere, HTTPS rest countries.eu /rest /v2/all. And that'll do it. Next thing we need to do is create a URL object using that string which contains the URL. So to do that, we'll say final URL equals new, and the constructor just takes in that string. Just like that. Gotta import this guy. Cool. Next up, we need to create a connection to this URL. So let's say TPS URL connection, perfect. Because ours is an HTTPS. I think there's the same counterpart, but for HTTP, if you need that. We'll call it connection, and we'll say our connection equals, no, because we're going to wrap this in a try catch method here to make sure it's able to connect to it correctly. So we're going to say try to connect to it. So try to set our connection equal to HTTPS URL connection. We're going to cast that from our URL object and open that connection. Cool. So If that doesn't work, we want to catch an IO exception. Call that E. And we could just print that stack trace if it didn't work. Okay, now that we've done that, we should hopefully have our connection opened, and we can actually start reading from that connection. So start pulling in that response of all those countries. So to do that, we're going to do that with a buffered reader, which I think is the most standard way to do this. Okay, call it buffer reader. Let's create the new buffered reader and create it from a new input stream. That's going to take in connection dot, get input stream, perfect. Okay, so now I've got our buffered reader, start reading from this. And we can, let me make sure that didn't get cut off. No, that's good enough. We're just missing the semicolon at the end of that. Okay. Okay, now we can go and start pulling this into a more readable object or data structure. In this case, we're just going to pull it into a string. So one thing to note here, as we start to read lines from this buffered reader, I noticed in this example, it's just a single line that contains that whole country response. So for me, it would be, for this use case, it'd be good enough to just say final string response equals br dot read line, and then that would contain the whole thing. But to make it, I guess, more robust and to handle cases where maybe there's multiple lines or if they change the API, I don't know, anything like that, we can actually just wrap this in a loop and continuously read lines and add to our string. So we'll just write it that way. So I'm going to say there's string input, and there's going to be string country, let's call it full country response. Set that to just empty at first. And now we can start looping through that. We could say while our input equals br dot read line. Okay, I need to wrap this too. So while this is not null, so while we still have stuff to read, we can continuously add to our full country response there. So I can say full country response plus equals input. That should be good enough. Then at this point, we've read in that full input. So we have that whole set of countries and all the information about the countries. Now we can close our connection. And after we close our connection, we can now return that full country response. Okay, so this looks good here. Now it's probably worth testing this before we go and use JSON path to actually read from that. So I want to test this. I'm going to just comment out our other method stubs so we don't get any errors when we run this. And I'm going to tweak our main real quick. Let's just, actually I don't need to copy that. System.out.print line of full, of randomizer dot get full country response. That looks good enough. Now, okay, we're going to see something here. If we just run this main, I think we're going to get an error. Let's see. Shouldn't take too long. This is slow. Okay, cool. So we got an error that it could not create the task during the configuration. Source set with name main not found. So if you Google this error, you'll be greeted with a helpful Stack Overflow question, which I'll try and remember to link in the description, that gives a couple solutions. I think one of them is a more permanent and long-term solution. The other one is just kind of temporary and simple, and I'm just going to go with that simple solution just for the sake of tutorial, and that's just to run this with coverage. If I run this now with coverage, it should run okay. Did I hit run? Non-protocol HTTPS. Oh my god, I spelled HTTPS. Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Not whatever the other P was going to be. Okay, so fun stuff. Now I'm going to rerun it. And what do you know, we get back this massive response. So you can see the scroll bar is teeny. If I wanted, I could copy this and throw it in a nice formatter. Like I like this one, this JSON formatter, curious concept one, and verify that it looks the way I want, and then plug that into my JSON path evaluator and test it out there. But I already know it works, so I'm not going to do that. Cool, so now I've got our full response. Now all that's left to do is to parse that response and choose that random country and pronounce name. So we need a couple more methods to get that working. So our first method we're going to do is one that takes in that full response. I'm going to call it full country response to make it more obvious. And we have this one that takes in nothing. Okay, so let's go over this one. This is our public API. So all this public method is going to do is it's going to say try, oops. I think I'll show you why you need the try catch. It'll throw an error if not, because we haven't handled our IO exception in the full response method. But okay, so simply put, we just want to return get random country name that takes in the full response and get full response, and that's all we want. But notice this says, oops, this says, okay, we're not handling our IO exception, so I just want to surround that with the try catch. And I need to throw something here because it needs to return, yeah. So I'm going to throw an error here, throw a runtime exception, and new runtime exception. Just say error getting country. And let's let ourselves know what that error is. So let's just get the message from it. Okay, cool. Now I've got this guy working. Now we need to fill in the meat of get random country name here. That's going to do all the work for us. So how does this guy work? The first thing we need to do is get a random number to choose our random country. So I already created a helper function here. This guy, nice cool little thing about this method, or that this is the best way to get a random number using thread local random, but that's apparently not supported in all of our Android versions. So just wrap that in if else to use the proper way if the Android version supports it. Otherwise, use this more rudimentary or less truly random way. And you could read on Stack Overflow some differences in why one's better than the other. Anyways, going back to our method. First, we want to get our random number. So we're going to say int rand. So this guy's going to be final too. I'm not changing them. Int rand equals get random country number. Okay, now I've got a random number. Now we can build that JSON path. String, let's call it path. And let's say it equals, this is the thing I showed you guys in the beginning, the JSON path. There's a lot of JSON path cheat sheets out there if you are less familiar with it. But getting the root element, and then the entry number is going to be that random number we just got, string.value of rand plus, gotta finish this off, close the bracket, and say the name property. That looks good to me. Now I've got our path. Now how to actually use JSON path within our Java code. And to do that, we're going to make use of an external library called JWay. And all I needed to do to import that, let's see if I can. Okay, that was embarrassing. To get that working, let's go to our build Gradle file. And yeah, take a look at this guy. This implementation group, jway.json path, name JSON path, that's only line I needed to add to import that JWay JSON path. Okay, cool. Now that that's imported, and I refreshed Gradle, good to go. I can start using that. And so first thing I'm going to do is get a read context. This is an object from that JWay library. I'm going to call mine JSON context and set that equal to JSON path, again from JWay dot parse, and we're going to parse our full country response. That's what we named it. Parse that full string with our JSON path. Now I've got our context. And now we can actually grab the name from that. So we can return from that context, JSON context dot read the path. Perfect. That should be it. Now everything here should work. Let's actually run this. And so thus far, nothing here has really been unique to Android. It's all been pretty much the same for Java, aside from that one random number thing I showed you. Aside from that, though, it's pretty much just Java code. Now when we incorporate this within our Android application and start throwing it into an activity, that's when we're going to start to notice some differences here. Okay, cool. So we got Burkina Faso. Capital of Burkina Faso is Ouagadougou. Fun fact. Yeah, so next we'll move on to incorporating this within our actual Android application.